I worked for 3 years as a hospital chaplain and ethicist at Mercy Hospital in Miami, where we had on the fourth floor a delivery room, maternity ward, and a neonatal intensive care unit. It cared for the more minor intensive care needs of newborn babies or premature babies. And the worst thing anyone that works in a hospital, I think, wants to hear and shudders when they hear it over the loudspeaker is Junior Code Blue. When you hear Junior Code Blue, it means that a baby has stopped breathing, or their heart has stopped and they're actively dying. I'd oftentimes be in the adult ICU, and whenever that went off, we ran as fast as we could to tend to that baby whose life was in jeopardy. And I'll never forget, we'll call him Baby Gabriel. We sat down with the CEO and CNO of this Catholic hospital, the head of the maternity ward and the palliative care unit, because the baby that was going to be delivered had trisomy 13, a genetic condition that guaranteed he would not live more than a week or 10 days after birth with his genetic defects. And the family and the mother had been told repeatedly by doctors, just abort it. He's going to die. Why would you carry this child to term? Why would you let him suffer like that and just die after birth? You should have an abortion. And the mother was convinced as a Catholic and as a human being that it's not this baby's fault that he has trisomy 13. He didn't do it to himself. I didn't cause it. It's happened and it's horrible, but how can I murder my own son because he's sick? How could I end the life of my child even though I know he's going to die? We're all going to die at some point, whether it's 1 week or 100 years. Death comes to all of us. And she was convinced and convicted, I will love my son until the very end, whether the Lord gives me 1 week or 100 years. And so she had to switch from doctors to find someone who would support the care of this baby in utero to birth, and a hospital that would welcome this child and provide hospice care so that he would not suffer. He would not agonize in his breathing, that he would be painless as much as scientifically possible, and loved to the very moment of the end of his life. And so we prepared for baby Gabriel. And when the day came that he was born, all of his family was there. Grandparents, brothers and sisters and cousins, doctors. They gave birth to baby Gabriel, and standing outside the room was their pastor, their Catholic priest, who went in and baptized him immediately and confirmed him. And from the moment baby Gabriel came out of the womb, and even for months beforehand, mom loved him. She ate healthily. She drank properly. She took care of him in every way possible while he was in the womb. Loved him and gave him every chance at life. And when he was born, he was quickly placed upon her breast, feeling the warmth of his mother's skin and her feeling him and seeing him for the first time, even with the genetic defects that come with trisomy 13. His entire life was spent being loved by God through the sacraments, nursed by his mother, held by his dad, kissed and sung to by his grandparents, held by all of his different brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles. I remember it was around Christmas time, and we had a children's event where they got to be with Santa Claus and take pictures, and the palliative care unit and the maternity ward brought him down in his little NICU, ICU baby container, carrier, for the lack of a better word. And he was able to take his pictures with Santa Claus. And he held little baby Gabriel, and they took their Christmas pictures. He only lived 10 days, as was expected. But those 10 days were full of love. It was an image and a powerful witness of what science can do to affirm the dignity of human life, to do extraordinary things to mitigate his suffering to an extraordinary degree, and to allow Gabriel to live as long as God would allow it, and be loved by everyone. Many people in that hospital were not Catholic, and many of them lived lives contrary to our church's teachings. But the witness of that mother and her family and husband and baby Gabriel was a profound teaching moment that I could have never taught with my words or my preaching. Life is sacred. It's not their fault they're born sick. It's not their fault that this happened. We cannot destroy the life, but we can love him until the very end. I share this story because the first reading today is a reading that we often read at funeral masses. On this mountain he will destroy the veil that veils all people, the web that is woven over all the nations. What is he talking about? Death. How often death can veil our eyes to the hope of eternal life, veil our eyes to a loving God, veil our eyes to the presence of Christ risen in the midst of such tragedy and devastation and heartache and sadness and loss and anger and why questions. On the web that is woven over the nations, he will destroy death forever. Often we read this passage at funeral masses. Maybe it was read at baby Gabriel's mass, I don't know. But there was a hope there. Behold our God, Isaiah says, to whom we look to save us. I can tell you that the nurses and doctors in that maternity ward, in the NICU, could behold God in baby Gabriel's sickness, in his parents' love for him and his family, and the doctor's incredible care to maintain his comfort and let him die peacefully when his time would come, and to live and flourish in love and kisses and songs and caresses every moment of his life until his last dying breath. This is the Lord for whom we looked. Let us rejoice and be glad that he has saved us. Even in that tragic story, we saw God as a God of life, a God of love. As you know, this November, we have a very powerful, obligatory opportunity to protect children, specifically those that are 22 weeks and older in the womb from being aborted. We have a fundamental obligation to speak out in defense of their life. Baby Gabriel wanted to live. It wasn't his fault that because of trisomy 13 he couldn't, but he did everything he could to live, outliving what the doctors expected, living longer and getting his picture with Santa Claus and having so many family and friends hug and kiss him and hold him and caress him. Gabriel wanted to live, and his mom gave him every chance, and the doctors in the hospitals did the same and loved him to the very end. And now, as a democratic republic, we have a chance to be the voice for other baby Gabriels that maybe were conceived under horrific circumstances or have severe genetic illnesses. I've met many women who have been told, and they've told me, Father, the doctor said my baby would have Down syndrome, that I should abort. I've met many, many women, and then I see their child and they're perfectly healthy. And I've seen others that have Down syndrome, and they're full of love and happiness and joy. Whatever the circumstances of these child's conceptions, we have a chance and a fundamental obligation to vote yes on Proposition 115. There's been a lot of arguments against Proposition 115 because there are no exceptions except for the danger to the life of the mother. What if they're raped? What if it was some horrific event that led to the conception? Well, sadly, they can still kill that baby who's innocent of that up until 22 weeks. And there's a very strong push against abortion in our country, I think, in part because of the history of our world of women being abused, mistreated, considered second-class citizens, raped, beaten, domestic violence. In our own country, just because you're a woman, you weren't allowed to vote. In our own country, in the 70s, right, thanks to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that changed. A woman can even take out a loan without her husband signing for her, as if she were a child. In our country, domestic violence still happens. There's still rape. There's still horrific abuse of women. And we know that women are oftentimes paid less for doing the exact same job as a man. These are evils that must be eradicated and ended, and laws must be passed to defend the dignity of the woman. There's been a long history of men abusing and subjugating women to second-class status, and it has to end. And we must vote and fight and make our voices be known that it never be allowed or permitted at all, and that they be defended by our laws, by our government, by the police, and by us speaking out in defense of the dignity of the woman. But a lot of women hear that when we want to impose these laws to make it so that they can't have an abortion after 22 weeks, they feel like Here's another man telling me what I can do with my body. Here's the government restricting my freedom. Here's some man in Washington telling me what I can or can't do with my body. It brings up this history of abuse and horrific treatment that is still ongoing around the world, understandably. And they're angry and they're hurt and they're frightened, and for good reason. But the issue for us is that it is not their body. It's another body. It's somebody that is different from their own, even though that child is in their body. Women should be defended and protected and treated equally and have all the equal rights and equal pay as any man. God willing, we have a woman as president one day. There should be no office in our government, in our society, where a woman can't have an equal opportunity to share their gift of womanhood and their gifts and talents toward that end. But when it comes to the issue of abortion, it's scientifically impossible for one human being to have two full, complete sets of chromosomal patterns, 46 and 46. It's impossible for one human being to have two different blood types. It's impossible for one human being to have two functioning beating hearts, two functioning sets of lungs, because there are two human beings there. And while the woman has her voice and must have her voice and must be heard, and her autonomy and self-determination and freedom must be honored and respected, we are speaking out on behalf of the child that has no voice, that is his or her own person. We were all zygotes once. As my physics teacher would say repeatedly in physics class at my public high school, we were all zygotes once. It's how we all began. It's how life begins, human life. And we have an opportunity to chip away a little bit at some of the horrific, unjust laws of our country that still prevail, namely abortion, while still wanting to defend the dignity and rights and freedom of women, but speaking out on behalf of that child who is in her body, but not her body, who is a distinct human being scientifically, not theologically or religiously, just on science alone. Of course, yes, in the latter, we're not imposing our religion. And so in this opportunity to sign this bill and vote yes in favor of Proposition 115, we are being a voice for the voiceless. Whatever the circumstances were that led to the conception of this child, however horrific, however sick that baby may be, they don't deserve to be killed. We know they experience pain and they suffer at 22 weeks and even well before. They have their own heartbeat, their own nervous system, their own blood type, their own chromosomal pattern. And the realities of abortion, especially at that stage and beyond, is a horrific, graphic evil that we have a fundamental moral obligation to say enough. No more. The state right now, according to polls, are split on this issue. Again, I think because of the deep concern for respecting women's liberties, and we should and uphold them. But we're talking about the child in the woman who's a separate person and who has no voice. Here in front of me are roses that we've kept here in front of the sanctuary, this ambo. They're symbolic. The red rose symbolizes all the babies lost through abortion, anywhere from 600,000 to 1.4 million a year in our country. The white roses are all the babies in utero waiting to be born, all the pregnancies here at our parish. We ask you to let us know if you're pregnant so we can add to the vase more white roses. And the pink rose is for those who have been lost because of miscarriage. I've been at the ER at 2 a.m, called when a mother comes in and she miscarries her 19-week-old baby. I was there. I saw him. And I had to coach the doctors and nurses through putting him in a worthy container and invite the parents to name their son and to ask for a death certificate and for that baby to be preserved and not thrown out, as so many hospitals do, like it's waste, so the parents could have a funeral mass and bury their son. I've seen the children at those many weeks, miscarried, and I know the heartache of so many women who have lost children through miscarriage. It is a real experience of death, a death of their own child that our society, I think, still fails to understand and to recognize. The heartache that a woman experiences when they lose their baby, no matter how many few weeks old in the womb that child is. The hopes that are lost and the dreams and desires that die with that baby's loss, and how few hospitals and doctors and peoples appreciate the necessity for that child, be it 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever many weeks, to have a worthy funeral, for the parents to mourn the loss of that child. Proposition 115 is about using our voice as a democratic republic to speak out for them, to defend their life and protect them, and let them live however God would allow it, with dignity, to not kill them over the circumstances of their conception or the consequences of their illness. I know that among us here, statistically it's a fact that there are women who have had abortions, that there are men and women who have helped people get abortions, driven them there, supported them, or paid for it. And I want you to know that as much as we speak about the grave evil of abortion, that if you have partaken in that, you are loved by God. You can be forgiven through the sacrament of confession if you haven't gone already. Christ suffered and died on the cross for you. Your unborn child prays for you. He or she is in heaven, and they want to see you there with them. I worked for a few years with Rachel's Vineyard and Project Rachel on weekend-long retreats with a therapist and many women and men who have actively killed their children through abortion. And I know the heartache and the complications of the circumstances that led to that horrific decision they regret. And the horrific pain and complications and problems that come subsequent to that, and the self-hatred and the self-mutilation. I've seen it firsthand, and I've heard it from the women and from the men, pleading for the life of their son from the woman, and they could do nothing about it while their child was killed. There is healing, there is hope, and there is forgiveness. And there's no greater witness to this reality than those who have gone through it and who now can speak out in defense of the dignity of human life. So go and vote. Vote yes on Proposition 115 and save up to 300 babies a year in our state alone. Let's do our part, respecting and acknowledging the fears that women have about the restrictions of their liberties and rights and basic dignity, while also acknowledging and recognizing the dignity of that child who is a separate person, albeit in her womb. It should not be that the most dangerous place to be in this country today is the womb of a mother. But so it is because of our laws and our circumstances. And so many women that go through horrific poverty and all kinds of horrific experiences that lead them to a decision the vast majority of times they do not want to take. And yet they do. And lives are lost. And our country is poorer because of it. Many people are chosen, or called rather. We've all been called by virtue of our baptism to eternal life, to salvation. The Jews were called through the covenant with Moses, but not all were chosen. The man that came unprepared, not properly dressed for the wedding feast, was because they were called, but they did not prepare well. They did not live well. They did not accept the good news. And so they were expelled. It was an analogy for the community of Matthew who heard this gospel about Jerusalem, how Jerusalem didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. And in the year 70, the Romans came and burnt and destroyed the city, as it was described in the parable. And how now we have been called by virtue of our baptism. We have been called to the banquet and we're here. But are we properly dressed, adorned with the virtues that the Holy Spirit gives us, and living a life in defense of the dignity of human life from conception to natural death in all of its forms? Are we living in such a way that having been invited to the banquet, the King will see us and say, "Welcome. It is good that you are here. You are well dressed. Come, let us eat and let us celebrate." Because my fear is that as a Catholic Church, so many who support abortion and other measures that directly destroy the dignity of human innocent life may shudder at the day that they are called home to God's kingdom. And they hear the words out of Jesus as they were heard in the parable today. My friend, how is it that you came in here without a wedding garment? Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Because many are invited. We all have been. But few are chosen. We ask and urge you to choose life in how you vote this November. Proposition 115 is a clear, easy way to do that. What it is written is what it is. It's not a politician or a party that can lie or be blocked by Congress or the Supreme Court. It's a written law. There's no question about what it is and what it means. There should be no question on how we vote, because we've been invited, and we must be chosen by how we vote and how we live.